At 72, you believe you have a certain understanding of the world, a grasp of the people you have loved and raised. You think that after half a century of shared holidays, patched up knees, and whispered secrets, the foundation of your family is solid rock. I learned with a chilling finality that my foundation was sand, and the tide was coming in orchestrated by my own son and his wife. The conversation that marked the beginning of the end was deceptively calm. It happened in the polished mahogany office of Mr. Goldstein, our family lawyer for 30 years. My husband, William, had been gone for 3 months. A period that felt both like a lifetime and a single agonizing second. We were there to finalize the details of his estate. I sat there a little smaller in my clothes than I used to be, clutching a handbag that held a crumpled tissue and the keys to a life that was about to be stolen from me. My daughter-in-law, Diana, a woman whose ambition was her most defining feature, leaned forward. Her nails were immaculate, a slash of crimson against the leather armrest. She was a real estate agent, and she viewed the world as a collection of properties to be acquired and flipped. It turned out I was just another property. She had spoken about my house, the one William and I had built our lives in, with a speculative gleam in her eye for years. Now, with William gone, her patience had evaporated. She directed her question to Mr. Goldstein, but her eyes were fixed on the potential commission. She inquired about the house, its market value, and the practicalities of a sale. I remember her exact words etched into my memory like acid on glass. "This house is worth at least $450,000 in today's market. Instead, it's just sitting here underutilized." I didn't flinch. I took a slow sip of the lukewarm tea the receptionist had brought me. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken greed. Mason Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair, a man perpetually caught between his loyalties. It was then that Mr. Goldstein, a man of quiet integrity, adjusted his spectacles and cleared his throat. He explained in his calm, measured tone the clause William had added to his will just 6 months before he passed. My darling William, always 3 steps ahead. He had established a trust not just for my living expenses, but with a specific, untouchable allocation for the lifelong maintenance, property taxes, and any future care I might need in that house. The money was legally ironclad, tied to the property itself. It could not be diverted. It could not be used to fund a nursing home. It was there to ensure I could remain in my home until my last breath, should I so choose. Selling the house would dissolve the trust, with the entirety of its funds being donated to the Alzheimer's Research Foundation. Diana's face was a study in controlled fury. The pleasant mask of a concerned daughter-in-law melted away, revealing the cold, hard avarice beneath. She saw $500,000, her dream kitchen, her luxury SUV, all vanishing into a puff of legal smoke. She said nothing but a war had been declared in that quiet, air-conditioned office. I had won the first battle thanks to my husband's foresight. I was naive enough to think it was the end of the war. 2 weeks later, I came home from my weekly grocery run to find my key wouldn't fit in the lock. For a moment, I was just confused. I jiggled it, pushed, my mind refusing to accept the reality before me. Then I saw them. My 2 suitcases, the ones I used for the rare weekend trips William and I took, were sitting on the porch. Next to them was a cardboard box sealed with packing tape with Mom's essentials scrawled on the side in my son's familiar handwriting. A wave of cold dread washed over me, so intense it made my knees weak. Taped to the front door was a crisp white envelope. My name, Eleanor, was written on the front. The note inside was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive cruelty, cloaked in the language of concern. Robert and Diana had decided for my own good that the house was too much for me. They were helping me transition into the next phase of my life. They had taken it upon themselves to pack a few things for me and had arranged a cozy and independent living space for me in the garage. They would be moving in temporarily to handle the necessary updates and preparations for the house's eventual sale, which they assured me was the most responsible course of action to secure my long-term financial future. My future, decided by them. In a note taped to my own front door, I stumbled around the side of the house, my heart hammering against my ribs. The side door to the garage was unlocked. They had cleared a small space amidst the lawnmower, the old paint cans, and the stacks of newspapers. William had never gotten around to recycling. A camp bed was set up with a thin blanket and a single flat pillow. A card table held a hot plate and a small lamp. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline and damp concrete. My life, my home of 45 years, my dignity had been condensed into this cold, dusty tomb. The rest of my belongings, my wedding china, my photo albums. William's books were stacked in precarious towers of boxes against the far wall. An impassive monument to my displacement. I sank onto the camp bed, the springs groaning in protest. The shock was so profound it was almost silent. There were no tears, just a hollow, ringing emptiness. And then through the fog of betrayal, a single sharp thought pierced through. A memory of a conversation with William years ago, when Diana had first convinced them to transfer the house deed into her and Robert's names for estate planning purposes to avoid probate. A move I had been uneasy with, but William, wanting to keep the peace, had agreed to with one condition he handled privately. I had been making the mortgage payments. Not them. Me. For the last 7 years, ever since William had retired and his pension had become our main income, the monthly payment had been automatically transferred from a joint savings account he had set up, an account funded by an annuity, hadn't even realized was solely in my name. I was the one paying for the house they had just thrown me out of. They had the deed, but I had the receipts. They had the keys, but I had the bank statements. That single electrifying thought was the spark. The hollow emptiness began to fill with a cold, hard resolve. I pulled out my phone, my fingers surprisingly steady, and dialed the number of my oldest friend, Martha. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, "Martha, can you come and get me? I've been evicted." Martha was there in 15 minutes, her face a thundercloud of protective fury. She took one look at the garage, at my suitcases, at my pale, set face, and her response was not one of pity, but of pure, undiluted rage on my behalf. She didn't coddle me. She didn't say, "It will be okay." She said, "We are going to burn them to the ground." As she helped me carry my few things to her car, leaving the key to the garage on the card table, I felt the first shift inside me. I was no longer Eleanor, the grieving widow, the gentle mother, the compliant victim. They had intended to put me in a box both literally and figuratively. They thought they were dealing with a frail old woman who would simply fade away into the garage. They had no idea who they were truly dealing with. Sitting in the warm, safe cocoon of Martha's car, I looked back at the house. My house, its windows dark and unwelcoming. It wasn't over. It had just begun. The guest room at Martha's house became my sanctuary and my war room. It was small, painted a cheerful yellow with a view of her prize-winning rose bushes. For the first 2 days, I did little more than sleep and stare out the window. The shock slowly receding, replaced by a deep, aching sorrow. Martha was a godsend. She brought me tea, sat with me in silence, and, when I was ready, listened without judgment as the whole sordid story poured out of me. She was a retired paralegal, and her mind was sharp and logical. She saw not just the betrayal but the tactical errors my son and daughter-in-law had made. "They're arrogant, Ellie," she said, her voice firm. "And arrogance makes people sloppy." Her words were a balm and a catalyst. The sorrow began to morph into something else, purpose. On the 3rd day, I woke up with a clear head. I showered, dressed in my best remaining clothes, and borrowed Martha's car. My first stop was the bank. I sat down with a young, kind branch manager named Mr. Chen. I explained calmly and factually that I needed a complete record of the annuity account in my name and a detailed history of all transfers made from it for the past 10 years. As he typed, the printer began to whir, spitting out page after page of my financial life. Seeing it all in black and white was empowering. There it was, proof. 7 years of consistent, uninterrupted mortgage payments, totaling over $84,000. Payments on a property I no longer legally owned, but which I had been single-handedly maintaining. I also discovered the annuity itself was far healthier than I had imagined. William had been a more astute investor than I ever knew. I had resources. I had leverage. My next stop was Mr. Goldstein's office. I walked in without an appointment, the stack of bank statements held to my chest like a shield. His receptionist, Martha's namesake, recognized me instantly and ushered me into his office, her face etched with concern. I laid the papers out on his polished desk. I told him about the changed locks, the garage, the note. I watched his calm demeanor crack, replaced by a flash of disbelief and then steely anger. He listened intently, his fingers steepled his gaze, never leaving my face. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "This is unconscionable, Eleanor," he said, his voice low. "This is not just a family dispute. This is wrongful eviction, and given your financial contributions, it is a gross violation of your equitable rights." He explained the concept of an equitable lien. Even though my name wasn't on the deed, my consistent documented payments toward the mortgage gave me a legal interest in the property. I had a claim that a court would recognize. "They own the paper," he explained. "But you own a piece of the bricks and mortar." He advised me on the first strategic step. It was simple, quiet, and devastating. "You will call the bank tomorrow," he instructed, "and you will stop the automatic payment for the mortgage." While the legal gears were beginning to turn, I knew I needed to reclaim my own sense of self. The idea of being financially dependent even on my own annuity felt like a vulnerability. Martha saw an ad in the local paper for a part-time assistant at the town library. It was mostly reshelving books and helping people with the copier. The pay was modest, but the thought of being surrounded by books by quiet purpose appealed to me deeply. I applied. And to my surprise, I was hired. My first day organizing the history section, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. I was Eleanor again, not just Mom or the old woman. I was a person in the world earning a paycheck, however small. It was a vital piece of my own reconstruction. As advised, I stopped the mortgage payment. For 3 weeks there was silence. I imagined Diana and Robert in my house, perhaps painting my living room a fashionable gray, picking out new furniture, oblivious. Then the first call came. It was Robert. His voice was laced with a forced, casual concern. He was just calling to check in, see how I was settling into the garage. He mentioned offhandedly that they'd received a strange letter from the bank. A missed payment notice. He was sure it was just a clerical error, but could I maybe look into it? I was polite, distant. I told him I was no longer handling those matters. I suggested he and Diana, as the homeowners, should probably contact the bank themselves. There was a pause, and I could hear the first tremor of panic in his voice. The calls escalated. A week later, Diana called. Her tone was sharp, accusatory. The bank had informed them their credit was now flagged. Did I have any idea how damaging that was? They were in the middle of a pre-approval process for another property, and this could jeopardize everything. The mask was slipping. Her mention of another property confirmed a suspicion that had been growing in my mind. The next day, I drove past my old house. A large "Garish for sale by owner" sign was staked into my front lawn with Diana's personal cell phone number on it. They weren't just updating the house, they were actively trying to sell it out from under me. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place that weekend. Driven by a hunch, Martha and I went to the county records office. We asked for recent property contract filings, and there it was. A pending sales contract for a massive new construction home in the next town over a house worth nearly $1 million. The buyers were listed as Robert and Diana. The contract was contingent on the successful sale of another property, my address. My home. The garage, the eviction. It wasn't about my well-being. It was a cold, calculated business transaction. They needed me out so they could sell my house to finance their upgrade. They were going to use the proceeds from my life to build their new one and leave me in a dusty garage. Back in Martha's yellow guest room, I spread the documents out on the bed. The bank statements, the wrongful eviction notes from Mr. Goldstein the for sale sign photo and the copy of their new home contract. It was a devastating, heartbreaking mosaic of greed. But looking at it, I didn't feel weak. I felt powerful. They had made a critical error. They had underestimated me. And now I had everything I needed to take back my life. The time for quiet preparation was over. It was time to confront them. With the evidence compiled, and my resolve hardened, the next step was to force a confrontation on my terms, not theirs. The desperate, angry phone calls from Robert and Diana had become a near-daily occurrence. They were veering between threats about what this was doing to their credit and saccharine pleas for me to be reasonable. They still hadn't grasped the reality of the situation. They saw the stopped payment as a tantrum, not a calculated legal strategy. It was time to educate them. I met with Mr. Goldstein again, and we planned the next move. He drafted a formal letter sent via certified mail to my address, requiring their presence at his office to discuss urgent legal matters pertaining to the property at 1142 Maple Street, including a pending foreclosure action and a significant equitable lien. The use of legal language was deliberate. We needed to shatter their illusion that this was a simple family squabble they could bully their way out of. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday. The panicked phone call from Robert came on Wednesday. For the first time, his voice held not just frustration but genuine fear. Alien Foreclosure. What was I doing? He accused me of trying to ruin them. I remained calm. I told him I was simply protecting my interests as advised by my counsel and that I would see them at Mr. Goldstein's office on Friday at 10 a.m. I did not say more. I did not have to. The power dynamic had fundamentally shifted. The ball was now in my court. On Friday morning, I walked into the law office feeling a strange sense of calm. I had spent the morning at the library. The quiet, orderly rows of books, a comforting contrast to the chaos my family had created. I wore a simple navy blue dress. My hair was neat, and I carried a leather portfolio containing my copies of the evidence. I was not a victim pleading for mercy. I was a plaintiff with a clear and documented case. They were already in the conference room when I arrived. Diana's posture was rigid, her face a mask of defiant anger. Robert just looked pale and exhausted, a man who had been stretched to his breaking point. They looked at me as I entered, expecting, perhaps, to see the frail, confused woman they had relegated to the garage. They seemed taken aback by my composure. I nodded at them coolly and took the seat beside Mr. Goldstein directly opposite them. The meeting began. Mr. Goldstein was magnificent. He didn't grandstand or moralize. He simply methodically laid out the facts. He began by placing a thick, spiral-bound binder in the center of the table. This, he said, his voice neutral, is a complete record of the financial contributions Mrs. Bradley has made to the Maple Street property over the past 7 years. He opened it, revealing page after page of bank statements with the mortgage payments neatly highlighted. As you can see, your mother has paid $84,212.48 towards the mortgage on a home you claimed as your own. These were not gifts. These were not rent. These were direct payments against the loan principal and interest. Diana scoffed her one attempt to regain control. She was living there. Of course, she should contribute. Mr. Goldstein didn't miss a beat. Contribution is one thing. Solely funding the asset is another. Under state law, this creates a clear and significant equitable interest in the property. In short, Eleanor has a powerful financial claim on the house. He then produced the second document, the official notice of intent to foreclose from the bank. As you are the legal owners on the deed, this foreclosure action is against you. It will be reported to all 3 credit bureaus within 10 days, effectively destroying your ability to secure any form of credit for the next 7 to 10 years. Your pending contract on the Newbridge property, he added, glancing at a copy of the sales agreement I had found, will of course be nullified. The color drained from Diana's face. Robert put his head in his hands. The full scope of their predicament was finally dawning on them. This wasn't about a missed payment anymore. This was about total financial annihilation. They had flown too close to the sun, and their wings, which they had constructed out of my life and my money, were melting. For the first time in the meeting I spoke. My voice was low, steady, and devoid of the hysterical emotion they were used to. "You threw me out of my home," I said, looking directly at my son. "You put me in a garage. You did this so you could sell my life's centerpiece to fund your upgrade. You did this behind my back with a note on the door as if I were a piece of old furniture you were tired of." Robert wouldn't meet my eyes. Diana, however, glared back a cornered animal. "We were trying to secure your future," she spat. "My future is quite secure," I replied, gesturing to the financial portfolio Mr. Goldstein had on his side of the table. "The question is about your future." I let that hang in the air. Mr. Goldstein took his cue. "Eleanor has 2 proposals for you," he said. The room was utterly silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning. Proposal 1. You immediately sign a quitclaim deed transferring the property at 1142 Maple Street back into Eleanor's name, free and clear of any claims from you. You will vacate the property within 14 days. In return, she will make the mortgage current, and she will not pursue further legal action for wrongful eviction or financial damages. He paused. Proposal 2. We do nothing. Eleanor allows the foreclosure to proceed. Your credit is ruined. You will lose your deposit on the Newbridge home. And she will then file a civil suit against you for the $84,000 she has invested plus punitive damages. Given the circumstances of the eviction, I am confident that a jury will be very sympathetic to her plight. It was a checkmate. There was no third option, no escape route. Their ambition had led them into a trap of their own making, and I held the key. I watched the calculation and panic war across Diana's face. I saw the shame and defeat in my son's slumped shoulders. The power dynamic had not just shifted. It had been completely seismically inverted. The woman from the garage now owned their entire future. I said nothing more. I simply sat there in my navy blue dress, the picture of quiet, unshakable strength, and waited for their surrender. The silence in that conference room stretched for what felt like an eternity. It was the sound of a carefully constructed world collapsing. Diana, a woman who always had an answer, a rebuttal, a strategy, was utterly speechless. Her mind was clearly racing, searching for an angle, a loophole, a way to spin this back in her favor, but the walls of the trap were solid. Robert, for his part, looked broken. He wouldn't look at me, but he wouldn't look at his wife either. He just stared at the polished surface of the table, as if it held the answers to how his life had unraveled so spectacularly. Finally, it was Diana who broke. Her voice, when she spoke, was raspy, stripped of its usual confident cadence. "You can't do this," she whispered, looking at me. "We're family." The audacity of that statement after everything she had done was breathtaking. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You stopped being family when you put my life in a cardboard box," I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. "You made a business decision. Now I am making one." Robert finally lifted his head. "Mom, please." He croaked, his eyes pleading. "The foreclosure. Our credit. We'll lose everything." "You are willing to let me lose everything," I reminded him gently. "My home, my memories, my dignity. The consequences you are facing now are the direct result of your own choices. Not mine." Mr. Goldstein, ever the calm professional, slid a pen and 2 documents across the table. "This is the quitclaim deed," he said. "And this is a settlement agreement acknowledging the situation and releasing all parties from future claims upon the successful transfer of the deed. I suggest you sign." Of course, they didn't have their own lawyer present. In their arrogance, they had assumed this was a meeting where they could bully and manipulate, not a legal execution. Diana looked at the documents as if they were venomous snakes. She looked at Robert, her eyes silently ordering him to fix it, to do something. But Robert was a broken dam. All the years of enabling his wife of choosing the path of least resistance had culminated in this moment of total powerlessness. He picked up the pen. His hand trembled. He looked at me one last time, a lifetime of regret in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, and the words were so quiet I could barely hear them. Then he signed the papers. He pushed them toward Diana. She stared at them. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head. Signing meant admitting defeat. It meant the end of her dream house. It meant returning to the life she was so desperate to escape. Not signing meant guaranteed financial ruin. It was a choice between a crushing defeat and a catastrophic one. With a choked sob of pure, unadulterated fury, she snatched the pen and scribbled her name. The process from there was swift and clinical. Mr. Goldstein had a notary waiting in the next room. The documents were signed, stamped, and witnessed. A copy of the agreement was handed to them. I was instructed to go to the bank and wire the funds to make the mortgage current, which I did that afternoon. The foreclosure action was halted. Their credit was saved from total destruction, but not from the severe damage the delinquency had already caused. The consequences for them were immediate and stark. They had 30 days to vacate my home, a fact stipulated in the agreement. They had to break the contract on their new house, losing their substantial $5,000 deposit. They now had to find a place to live, a rental with a fresh credit delinquency on their record. A landlord's worst nightmare. The carefully curated image of success Diana had built was crumbling around her. I did not see them during that 30-day period. I stayed with Martha, continuing my work at the library, methodically rebuilding my life while they were forced to dismantle the one they had tried to steal. Robert called once a week before they were due to move out. He was subdued, asking if they could have an extra week. I said no. The agreement was 30 days. The deadline was firm. I was learning to set boundaries, not with anger but with unmovable resolve. The day they moved out, I didn't go to the house. I didn't want to see them. I didn't need the satisfaction of watching their U-Haul pull away. My victory wasn't in their humiliation. It was in the quiet, legal document that now sat in my portfolio. The deed to my home with my name and my name alone on it. A few days later, Mr. Goldstein called me. He had received a final petulant letter from a lawyer Diana had belatedly hired, attempting to claim that some of the furniture in the house was theirs. Mr. Goldstein informed him that the settlement agreement they had signed included all fixtures and contents, and that any further claims would be considered harassment. We never heard from them again on the matter. The battle was truly over. I had won. I had taken back my home. I had taken back my life. The cost was the family I thought I had, but I was beginning to understand that it had been an illusion all along. What I had gained was myself. The first time I walked back into my house as its sole undisputed owner, it felt strange, like putting on a coat that no longer quite fits. It was my home, but it was tainted by their presence, their intentions. The living room had been painted that fashionable, soulless gray Diana was so fond of. My comfortable, worn armchair had been replaced by a sleek, uncomfortable monstrosity. It felt like an invasion. For a month, I didn't sleep in my own bedroom. I stayed in the guest room, the one that had been my sanctuary at Martha's. I needed to reclaim the space, not just legally but emotionally. Martha and my granddaughter Emma were my saviors during this period. Emma, who had been away at college during the worst of the ordeal, was horrified and incandescent with rage when she learned the full story. Her loyalty to me was a balm to my wounded heart. Together, the three of us undertook a project of reclamation. We repainted the living room, restoring it to its original warm, creamy white. We hauled the ugly modern furniture to a consignment shop and retrieved my beloved armchair from the garage where it had been stored under a dusty tarp. We scrubbed, we cleaned, we opened the windows to let the fresh air chase out the stale energy of greed and betrayal. Slowly, painstakingly, it began to feel like my home again. I had the locks changed for the third time, and this time only 3 keys were made. One for me, one for Martha, and one for Emma. I kept my job at the library. It had become more than a distraction. It was a connection to my community, a source of quiet satisfaction. My colleagues knew nothing of my family drama. They just knew me as Eleanor, the reliable woman who knew where every book on the Civil War was shelved. This newfound independence was precious. I managed my own finances with Mr. Goldstein's help in setting up a more robust plan. I was in control, and the feeling was more profound and satisfying than I could ever have imagined. The relationship with my son was the most complex casualty of this war. About 2 months after he moved out, Robert asked to see me. We met in a neutral space, a small park halfway between my house and the modest apartment he and Diana had been forced to rent. He looked older, tired. The ambition that had been lit by his wife seemed to have been extinguished, replaced by a deep-seated weariness. He apologized again. This time it felt different. It wasn't the panicked plea of a man trying to avoid consequences. It was the quiet, shame-filled confession of a man who finally understood the gravity of his actions. He told me that his marriage was unraveling. The financial stress, coupled with his dawning realization of Diana's true character, had shattered their foundation. I didn't offer false forgiveness. I didn't say, "It's okay," because it wasn't, but I did agree to his request to start family counseling, just the two of us. It was a long, arduous process. There were sessions filled with angry tears and others with stony silence. But slowly he began to unpack the years of his wife's influence, his own weakness in the face of it, his deep-seated fear of her disapproval. It wasn't an excuse, but it was an explanation. We are still working on it. The trust that was broken may never be fully repaired, but we are building something new, something more honest on the rubble of the old. I have not spoken to Diana since the day she signed the papers. From what I hear from Robert, she is deeply bitter, blaming him. The world for the downfall of her ambitions. I feel nothing for her, not even anger anymore. She is simply irrelevant to my life. Emma, however, has become a fixture. She spends most weekends with me, filling the house with laughter and the smell of burnt toast. She is my fierce protector, my confidant, my proof that the family line is not entirely poisoned. Sometimes, when I am sitting on my porch in my comfortable armchair watching the sunset paint the sky, I reflect on the journey. I think about the woman who stood weeping in a dusty garage, and the woman who now holds the deed to her own life. The path between the two was terrifying, but it was also liberating. I learned the hard way about the importance of legal documents, of financial independence, of knowing your rights. My advice to anyone, especially women of my generation who may have entrusted their futures to others, is simple: be involved. Ask questions. Read the fine print. Never sign anything you don't fully understand. Your security is your own responsibility. William's trust fund remains untouched, a silent testament to his love and foresight. I live comfortably on my annuity and my small paycheck from the library. My life is not grand, but it is my own. I have found a strength I never knew I possessed, a resilience forged in the fire of betrayal. I did not break. I bent, I was bruised, but I did not break. And in the end, I stand taller. Not because I won a war against my family, but because I won back myself.